So I'm ready to start weaving my cardigan from hand spun yarn. But before I show you what the warp looks like, I want to talk a little bit more about how I completed my design process. And then I will show you how I will finish warping the loom. So when I started planning this project, I had spun the yarn in 3 different combinations. There was the plain yak silk spun as it comes right off the braid. Then I had some alpaca with little tiny bits of the same yak silk mixed into it and both these ways I applied on themselves. Then I had spun a skein, or however much I had, of 2 plies of alpaca with 1 ply of the yak silk. And then I wanted to come up with an arrangement that would look good with these 3 different colors of yarn. And as it turned out, my stash yielded a light, slightly variegated hand-dyed skein in this bright pinky, purpley, magenta-y color. I don't even know what to call this. And a very, very pale, dusty rose kind of color. So when I wove my set sample on my little sampling loom, I just used my hand spun. And you can see that when the yak silk is used as warp and weft, it gives me this really luscious color that will change, you'll see in the warp, because the colors change in the yarn. And when I continued with the alpaca weft, I ended up with, you kind of lose the color changes in the yak silk. And that's to be expected. That's just what happens. But then I pulled out my zoom loom. And I was not using my zoom loom to check for set. I was just using it to check for color interactions. And this gave me some really interesting results. So one of the zoom loom squares I wove, I used a commercial yarn. And on the zoom loom, which is Shaq's little 4-inch by 4-inch pin loom, you wrap the pins with 1 layer of yarn, and then you turn it and you wrap it in another layer. That second layer is actually half of the weft. Then you wrap a 3rd layer to finish up the warping process, and then you weave across with a needle in the 4th layer. So when you've finished prepping the zoom loom, you've got all the warp and half the weft in place, and then you use a needle to needle weave the last half of the weft. So on this one, I warped the loom. In fact, I did 2 layers with a commercial yarn in an off-white, and then I wove the patterning in, again, the yak silk and some other hand spun I had lying around that was similar in color to the alpaca but not identical. And that's what this square turned out to be. Then I tried this bright color as the warp and yak silk, and then the alpaca as my weft, or half my weft. And what I noticed here was that, again, because this color was so bright, it was kind of taking over and obscuring what was happening with my hand spun. And what I really want to do with this project is to show off my hand spun. Next example, I used, and you can see by looking at the edges, I used the alpaca. I used the alpaca most of the way through, and some of the weft is the 2 strands of alpaca plus 1 strand of the yak silk, and the rest of it is just pure yak silk. And here because there's such a difference in color, in the variations, and especially in the value between the off-white alpaca and the dark in value colors of the yak silk, I didn't love this one either. Finally, I did a sample where I used this pale pink, this dusty rose, as all of the warp, and then I wove half the square with the alpaca and another half of the square with the yak silk. And what I liked about this is this alpaca yarn is lovely, and it's not really my color. It's not necessarily something I want to have right next to my face. Whereas the yak silk is absolutely a color I want to have next to my face. But when the alpaca is combined, is interwoven with this pale pink, this dusty rose, suddenly it's a color I could wear next to my skin, right next to my face, without it completely fading me out. So when I started planning how I wanted the panels on my cardigan to play out, I decided that what I wanted to do was to try and graduate the colors so that they would start off, and I'm going to adjust the camera here a little bit, and this is going to be wiggly, sorry. It would start off on one edge with just a little bit of the 2-strand alpaca plus 1-strand rose yak silk. Then I interwove, then I switched to straight up alpaca, and then I tried to do an ombre effect with that dusty rose. And again, just kind of gradually interleaved the different colors and finished up so that about 2/3 of the width of this 13-inch weaving width is going to end up being the yak silk. And when I start weaving, I will weave the front panels so that at the bottom, they start with a little bit of this variegated, this 3-ply yarn, then morph into the alpaca without any of the strands of yak silk, and then finish up. So I'll end up with a stripe going across the bottom. I'll have a stripe, and then it'll change to another stripe, and then it will change to a third stripe. And I think that those color interactions are going to be really stunning. I think they're going to be pretty dramatic, but it will be really eye-catching. And the back, I will just weave in yak silk unless I start running out of yarn, which is always the possibility because yarn chicken is a big part of my life. And if that happens, I will figure out something to do so that I can use some of this dusty rose. And then the other front panel will start out with the yak silk, and then it will finish with those stripes that eventually shade into the alpaca and then the 3-ply colorway. So that's the plan. We'll see how it goes. And I'm going to get it set up right now so that I can show you what it looks like to finish up direct warping a rigid heddle loom.